let me just say, if you don't know Zan, you better go get to know her. So if you weren't just challenged, encouraged, and inspired by that girl's fire and energy, let's have another conversation or something. So anyways, get to know her. Zan is she's the real deal, and we are so glad that you're here, Zan. Thank you. So hey, if you're new with us, my name is Mark Lohman, and I'm the associate pastor here at New Life. And I thought I would just start us off this morning saying that, you know a Bible verse is being abused and misinterpreted when it's used as motivation and advertisement to knock someone out, literally. So most of you know I'm a big sports fan. I'm not a huge boxing fan, though. But I will never forget the Mike Tyson and Evander Holyfield boxing matches that happened in 1996, 1997. If you're too young or you don't know who those people are at all, my guess, though, is that you remember some story of some guy literally biting off a piece of an ear of another guy in a boxing ring. That's what most people know Mike Tyson and Evander Holyfield and those boxing matches for. What's even more fascinating, though, for us this morning, as it relates to our series Straight Outta Context, is that when Evander Holyfield entered the boxing arena, he had Philippians 4:13 on his robe and on his shorts. So we got a couple pictures here to show you what I'm talking about. So he calls himself the real deal, and then he's got Philippians 4:13 there on the left side of the shorts. And there's his robe. So not making this up. So you kind of get the feeling, and maybe I'm reading too much into this, I don't know, who knows, but it's fun, is that for Evander Holyfield, he's kind of walking into the boxing ring, and I guess the message he's sending by those pictures is that, hey, I can beat the tar out of Mike Tyson because I have Christ who strengthens me. He actually said this in an interview, and I'm quoting him, "With God on your side, the things you choose to do, you can do. With God on your side, the things that you choose to do, you can do." In this case, I guess it's knocking out Mike Tyson. So there's kind of this feeling here that Philippians 4:13 is like this blank check promise, and that you can create a goal, you can then quote Philippians 4:13, and then God's going to make it happen. Kind of roughly, that's what's going on here. Now, Holyfield, he's not the only athlete who sports Philippians 4:13. Did you get the little pun there? The only athlete who sports Philippians 4:13. Okay, we're a little awake. So here's another famous athlete. I'm sure you know him. Tim Tebow, who's actually now becoming a baseball player. He's not even a football player anymore. But here's the cover of a Sports Illustrated magazine. And Tim Tebow, he always puts a Bible verse, which is awesome, on his anti-glare sun black patches underneath the eyes. So he's got Philippians 4:13 there. Our next one, we have Stephen Curry. Curry is probably my favorite basketball player to watch right now. Love the dude. On his shoes, he's got 4:13 there, referencing Philippians 4:13. And just to kind of round this whole thing out, we have the classic sports motivational poster with a rock climber climbing this huge cliff, with Philippians 4:13 on it, that he can climb this piece of rock because God gives him the strength to do it. One other sphere that I personally thought of this, maybe some of our young students can relate to this. You'll see this a lot in the classroom. So you got that big test coming up, right? And of course, every student studies for all of their tests. And so the teacher's up there, handing out the Scantrons. All the students they're like shaking their hand with like a pencil in it. And then under their breath, everyone's saying, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. I did that. I also went to Christian private school, so I don't know, maybe that's why. Anyways, there's nothing wrong with Christian private school. Let me clarify that. Here's my point, though. In our culture, and specifically actually Christian culture, this is like the go-to verse to get extra motivation, extra inspiration, to go conquer something, and you're going to do it saying that God has helped you do it. Let me be clear. There is no doubt a degree of truth in that, right? So I'm not here like mocking these people, bashing them. I'm just giving you real life examples. And no doubt, we can accomplish some pretty big tasks through Jesus. Amen. Okay? So let me be clear on that. But as you know, we've also been going through this series straight out of context. And this is our last Sunday this morning in it. And really the point of us going through this series isn't just to, be fun and edgy. But more importantly, it's to actually teach us, to model, how should we read the Bible? Because often I think we treat it like a fortune cookie or a horoscope, right? Where we just take little snippets out of it, little phrases, and they're nice and cute and cliche, and then we use those to justify different actions and motivations and behaviors. The problem with that is that, obviously the Bible is not a fortune cookie, but it's a story. And you have to read it like a story. If someone sends you a letter, do you just read a sentence out of it in the middle and you ignore everything before it and then everything after it? No, we don't do that. You'd have problems reading it if you did that. And so just as kind of a last time offer, we did make a resource for you with just simple tips and ways to how to practically read the scriptures and have it penetrate your life and affect you. So these are at the information center and back in the lobby. Please pick one up. We'll have them available for just a couple more weeks. But back to Philippians 4:13. So what's going on here? Well, let's put this whole thing into context. So we're going to back up a couple verses ahead of verse 13, and we're going to start in Philippians chapter 4, verse 10. And we'll have it on the TV screens. Use your iPhone. If you want a free Bible, we have these available for you underneath the chairs in front of you. Darren Harper's already got it out. That's what I'm talking about. Good example. So we'll be on page 820 in those free gray Bibles. I'll start on page 820. Verse 10, here we go. This is Paul writing. He says, I rejoiced greatly in the Lord that at last you renewed your concern for me. Indeed, you were concerned, but you had no opportunity to show it. And we'll pause right there. Let me kind of get us up to speed on this situation. Here's what's going on. Paul is writing to the ancient church in Philippi, but he's writing to them from a prison cell, okay? And precisely because he's in the prison cell, he has not spent time, it could be a couple months, perhaps even a couple years, we're not sure. It's been a while since he's been in dialogue with this church, okay? They used to have a really good relationship. Paul perhaps planted that church, started it, knew them well, and now they haven't talked for a while. The other thing you need to know is that prison was actually far, far, far different back then than it is now. It was worse. They did not feed you. They did not give you clothes. You were literally on your own in this cell. And so meaning the only way that you were fed or brought clothes or money or whatever else you needed is if a family member or a friend or whoever came and visited you and gave you those resources. And so Paul's writing this letter to the Philippians, hasn't seen them in a while, he's in prison. He's probably at a loss of relationship, loss of freedom. He's even thinking, is my life going to end? My ministry is over, all this stuff. And we know 2 chapters earlier in this letter, chapter 2, verse 25, that this church sent a guy named Epaphroditus to Paul. And they sent Epaphroditus to care for Paul, to help him out. And so Paul gets to this letter, and at the end, he kind of sticks on like a thank you note. He says, hey, thank you guys for sending Epaphroditus to me. And then he moves on, and he gives a real quick clarification saying, hey, just so you think that I'm just kind of using your relationship, that I'm only thanking you because you sent someone to me. He says, let me say something to clarify for you. Verse 11. I'm not saying this because I'm in need, meaning, you guys aren't just like friends with benefits for me. I'm not just using you for what you're giving me because you sent Epaphroditus. And then listen to this. This is super important for verse 13. I'm not saying this because I'm in need, for I have learned to be content, whatever the circumstances. I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. And then famously, I can do all this through Christ who strengthens me. I love what one author put about this passage. He said, "Don't be fooled by the footlocker reading of this verse. I can do all things through Jesus. I can hit a home run. I can run a marathon. I can score a touchdown. I can pass my AP US history exam through God's strength." Like I said, the all things of Philippians 4:13 certainly does mean all the positive things of life, our successes. Absolutely. But the edgy part of this verse is that the all things also includes the hardest things: loss, hunger, poverty, prison. The all things include some pretty hard things. And so we can't just say, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me, and have that only mean the positive things. Paul, he's like the perfect guy to speak into this issue. What do I mean? Paul's someone who's lived, in a lot of ways, a life of luxury, actually. He's been through the good times. He's educated, which that in of itself puts him up a couple levels in that culture. But Paul has also been in the bad times, what he's in currently, in prison. Right? And he tells us for this, and I want us to really get this, verse 12, so I'm going to read it again. "I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I've learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, living in plenty or in want." So it's not like Paul is, sitting back with like his feet up on the chair, Mediterranean beach house. Servants are bringing him cups of wine, medium rare steak with a side, Caesar salad, corn on the cob. That's my favorite meal. He's not getting a massage. My wife loves getting massages. No, the dude's in prison. And his point is really simple. Circumstances don't determine your content. Fulfillment, satisfaction, happiness isn't found in what we have or where we are. Circumstances don't determine our satisfaction in what we have or where we are. Yeah, Mark, that's a really cute cliche phrase, like cool, but hey, let's all be honest, that's only true in theory. No. I think we actually know this experientially. Haven't we all kind of been in that ideal situation, only to realize that we just want like a little bit more? For instance, let's say you finally land that job that you've always wanted, like in the career that you want to go into. What happens after a year or two? Well, then you want a promotion, right? That entry-level job's not enough. And then you get that promotion, and then maybe a couple years go by, and then you want to become a manager. Well, then you become a manager and you realize, hey, management is actually not all that it's cracked up to be. It's got its own issues, and now I actually want to be a CEO of my own company. But then you become the CEO, and maybe the market crashes and your product is no longer needed. And so then you're like, well, I want to go to a more lucrative company and be in upper level management there. The game never ends. And we do the exact same thing with houses, with clothes. We even do it with music, right? You hear that popular song on the radio, it's cool for a couple months, and then you're done with it and you move on and you want something better. We do this with sports. There's a phrase called bandwagon fans. right? Which is what Clipper fans are today. See, I am the living embodiment of this message because I am a Laker and Angel fan, and we are in the wilderness right now, and I'm still committed and I'm still content. We'll see how the Dodgers are in about a month after they choke in the playoffs. They say that if you want to grow a church, you reach the men, and so you talk sports. Let's do it. So, here's my point, though. Whenever we achieve a goal, the goalpost just moves a little bit back further. You ever realize that? When we achieve a goal, the next thing we want is then just slightly out of reach. I'm reminded of a famous question and answer. The richest person in modern history, John Rockefeller, he was asked, how much is enough? Do you know what he said? Joanne Verhoeven just whispered it. He said this, just a little bit more. Richest man, modern history, how much is enough? Just a little bit more. It is hard to be wealthy and to be content. Circumstances do not. There's not a direct correlation to contentment. And by the way, if you live here in America and you live in a house and you eat 3 meals a day and you have clothes in your closet, from a global perspective, statistically, you are wealthy. I mean, how many people, this is so fascinating to me, people who go, to other countries, or I read things to third world countries, what we would call that. What do they always say? I hear this time and time again. I was so surprised at how happy and joyful these people were. Speaking of the natives. I mean, people who have absolutely nothing have more energy, joy, and spunk. Still don't believe me. Well, there was a Gallup poll done in 2012 that revealed that people in 7 developing Latin American countries, Paraguay, Panama, El Salvador, Venezuela, I don't have that accent yet, but they're actually the most likely to report being happy and feeling positive about life. Listen to this. Surprisingly, people who live in really well-developed economies and are business-oriented like Singapore are actually some of the least happy people on earth. Here's the statistic. Residents of Panama, which ranks 90th in the world in GDP per capita. I don't know economics, but I think that means gross domestic product. 90th in the world, residents of Panama are the most likely to report positive emotions. Residents of Singapore, ranked 5th in the world, there's only 4 countries with a better economy, are ranked dead last in positive feelings and overall well-being. Okay. So if contentment is not maybe necessarily related to circumstances, Mark, maybe I just kind of, need to be like really strong inside, right? I can just determine if I'm happy or not. It doesn't matter what happens to me. I'm just going to be even keel. I'm going to look really kind of from within. I'm going to be this strong, independent, self-sufficient person. Okay. That's what people thought and did 2,000 years ago. In the ancient city of Philippi, where the Philippine, I almost said Filipinos, the Philippian church was located, there was a movement called Stoicism. Now, real quick, what do we call people who are emotionless and just kind of even keel? Something really bad happens to them and they're not crying, they're just kind of like, yeah. All right, and then something really good happens to them, like the Dodgers win or something, they're not used to it, and they're we call that person stoic. That's actually because there was a philosophical movement in the first century outside of Philippi called Stoicism, and Stoicism's number one virtue was contentment. And really by contentment, they meant self-sufficiency. That you're going to remove yourself from everything around you, the ebb and flow of life, the good and the bad, and you're just going to find the inner strength to be strong and independent and do life by yourself because you're self-sufficient. So we get to verse 11, and the Philippians would have thought, wow, Paul, you sound like a stoic here. I mean, he says, for I've learned to be content. The Greek word for content there was a buzzword in Stoic philosophy. The exact same word was used, and it meant self-sufficient. For I've learned to be content, whatever the circumstances. I know what it is to be in need. I know what it is to have plenty. I've learned the secret of being content in and every situation. Okay, Paul, so what's the secret? They would have expected, next verse, verse 12, for Paul to say something like this. I can do all things through my self-sufficiency. I can do all things because I have the energy and the strength from within to rise up over my circumstances. What does Paul say instead? I can do all this through him who strengthens me. Paul flips their paradigm on its head. Not through yourself. It's through God. He says he's content in any circumstance, not because of the circumstances itself, which is the first part we talked about, and then not because of his own self-sufficiency, but because of God's sufficiency. Not self-sufficient, God sufficient. Paul learned the secret to being content was Jesus. Sounds like a Sunday school answer. It's true. Paul learned the secret to contentment was Jesus, because your circumstances will change, but Jesus doesn't. Francis Chan, a pastor, he says this about this passage. Philippians 4:13 is not about this promise to make you rich. It's telling you that you're rich in Christ. You don't have a penny to your name, but you can be content. Out of context, Philippians 4:13 is used as like a blank check promise. In context, Philippians 4:13 is about contentment. It's about God's strength enabling you to get through whatever circumstance, and particularly the more troublesome ones. Another author put it this way, and this is so anti-American. If you're not offended by this, you should be offended. Let me just leave it that way. It's not about your dreams coming true or your goals being met. It's not about winning the football game. It's actually about what you do after you lose the football game. After you've been injured for the season. After you haven't made the team. Philippians 4:13 is not about getting that new house, that new car, that new wardrobe. It's actually about being fully satisfied and content in Jesus, in your house right now, and your car right now, and the clothes in your wardrobe right now. Ouch. So perhaps, Evander Holyfield should have used this verse in this way as he's walking inside the arena. If Holyfield expected and thought, well, you know what? Mike Tyson is going to beat the tar out of me. I'm going to get knocked out. And you know what? I'm still going to be content. I can be content with getting the tar beat out of me by Mike Tyson through God who strengthens me. Let me just say this. If you haven't figured this out already, this is really hard to do. Following Jesus and being content in him, having your joy and your satisfaction in him is pretty challenging. Even more so, I think, for us, because we live in a culture that is self-sufficient, that is super independent, that's all about money making. And so it is hard for us to be dependent on Jesus. And listen to this, both in the good times, because then we want to forget about him, and then in the bad times, because then we want to blame him. That's hard for us to do. That's what I love what Paul says in verse 11. He uses this really simple word. For I have learned to be content, whatever the circumstances. So was this an over-the-night experience for Paul? Did he just suddenly realize this? No, he learned. There's a process there. There's a journey there. At least for me, that's comforting, and I can relate to that. I can relate to a process and a journey of learning this. So here's what this famous passage is asking us this morning. Do you believe Jesus is enough? Do you believe Jesus is enough? Wherever you are, and there are certainly different experiences and backgrounds in this place this morning. Have you learned, are you learning the secret that Paul talks about here? The beauty of Jesus is that no matter where you're at, you can be satisfied in him. You can be filled with joy because joy is not dependent on your circumstances. Really good times or really bad times. I think that's good news. This was a question that haunted me for much of my young life, specifically during college and right after college. I wrestled a lot with this topic, and I didn't realize it till probably the end of those years. Here's what I wrestled with. And this is going to sound really weird to probably some of the guys in here. I was not content with my singleness. I was probably a really bizarre and weird dude, and I still am. Just ask my wife. I was actually that guy in college who wanted to get married right away. And I wanted to find my girl, settle down, get married, and live a Disneyland fairy tale. Some of the single guys were like, what'd you drink during college, man? I love my singleness. Hey, that's my story. And I run the risk in bringing that up in that I know that there are people in here right now who are actually in a far more serious situation. And so I want to acknowledge that. What I'm here sharing is nothing compared to a lot of your experiences that you're in right now, okay? And so I get that. But I was just hunting for the right girl. Didn't find her in college. Didn't find her right after college. Found Rachel in my very last class in seminary, which is grad school for pastors. So I guess there was a good thing that came out of all my thousands of student loans. Just imagine for the people where that doesn't happen. Here's the reason why I bring this up. I was not satisfied with Jesus during that season. I was not content, and I did not like the circumstances that he put in front of me. The problem is, if I didn't learn to be content while I was single, I would have entered marriage with Rachel in a disaster. Because the way discontentment works is that it's not built upon your circumstances, right? The lie that we buy into about contentment is this: if I get this, or if this changes, then I'll be content, then I'll be happy. And so what I had to learn in my singleness to be content and satisfied and full of joy in Jesus. Because if I entered my marriage with Rachel discontent and expecting her to fulfill all of my deepest longings, the problem is that Rachel's a human and she's not going to be able to actually make me content. And vice versa. The same thing for me, for Rachel. Marriage would have been a disaster if that's what I thought and I was looking to find my contentment in our marriage. She'll never be enough. There will always be something or someone else. There's always that temptation. And so another way of asking us is this: what are you ultimately pursuing to make you happy? That's the question. Is it Jesus, or is it a new car, a new house, new relationships, sports team, whatever? And let's be honest, is that really working? I would bet you that that's going to eventually, not fulfill you. And I'm talking in the long term. Short-term satisfaction is easy to find. That's cheap. It's superficial. We all enter those new seasons, right? Everything's fun and exciting. I'm talking long-term contentment. Because discontentment, it does this. It reveals our false gods. It reveals what you're really actually going after to make you happy. The good thing about that is that once we realize that, and then we can look at the one true God who can actually satisfy you. See, the thing is, every single one of us in here were actually made to worship. You were made to worship. You were made to give God the glory, because when you do that, he gives you the satisfaction. I didn't have this plan. Zan, I know Zan well. I don't know her super well, though. But I just see her energy up here, and it seems to me, from what I know of Zan, that if she didn't have Jesus, not sure if some of that contentment and joy would be there. Did you say that's right, Zan? Oh, yeah. Good thing she didn't say no there, right? That was a risky move. But oh, yeah, there we go. Old church theologian named Augustine said this. Love this quote. Our hearts are restless until they rest in thee. Our hearts are restless until they rest in thee. Every single human being yearns for love, yearns for relationship, in celebration or desperation. Think about this. In our really good moments, parties, celebrations, I want you to imagine yourself in a room, I don't know, party, club, wherever you like to party and celebrate. I don't need to know where that's at. But I want you to imagine being yourself in there. Music's playing, you're eating cake, you're dancing, all this stuff, and you're doing all that by yourself. Weird. I don't know, maybe some of you do that. Right? But we yearn for love, for people, for relationships in our good moments. We want someone to listen to celebrate with, to join arms with. Okay, now what about our bad times? How about when you're in the hospital? When you come home and you have to tell someone that you were just laid off? When a relationship just ended? What do most of us want in that? We still want someone to be with us, to love us, to listen to us. Seasons come and go, money comes and goes, health and sickness comes and go, vacations come and go. But there is one thing that is unshakable and can withhold any ebb and flow of life, and it's Jesus. That's what I'm talking about. Let's get the amens up in here. Is that you, Giovanna? I got you. The one who died for us was raised to life. Because of what happened on the cross, nothing can separate us from the love of God in Jesus. There is nothing guaranteed in our life except for a relationship with Jesus. Everything's up for grabs except the love of Jesus. So I think that's why, a follower of Jesus, through sickness, through health, through vacations, through the loss of a spouse, through a new marriage, through a promotion, through a firing, or just through the loss of all things, can still say, as Paul says, I've learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. And I can do all this through Christ who strengthens me. And so I have no idea where you're at this morning. No idea what circumstances you're in. Really good, really bad. My guess is a mixture of both. And so I'm going to invite the music team back up. And we're going to go through our response time. And here's what I want us to do. I want you to think, reflect on, is Jesus enough for you? Are you looking to find your happiness in Jesus or in the circumstances around you or your own inner strength? Is Jesus enough? Are you learning that secret? And so there's so many ways to respond. Right? We have communion right here to be reminded of Jesus' love for you. He died on the cross for you. If you need prayer, we'll have a prayer team back behind the organ. Pray for anything. We have candles over here that you can light to signify. Maybe you can be happy in a horrible situation because of Jesus. Stand, sit, sing the songs, but let's respond. Let's have a posture of openness to the Holy Spirit. And so the usher's going to come forward now. We're going to take our offering as well. If you're family here at New Life, this is an act of worship, of us giving ourselves away so that we can partner and bless this community. So I invite the ushers forward now.